I was standing in the parking lot when it happened. Not sitting, not prepared. Just standing there with my car door half open, the engine still warm. My mind already running through the day's problems. I remember the smell of hot asphalt. The way my phone vibrated in my palm instead of ringing. One short buzz that somehow felt heavier than all the calls I'd taken in my life. I looked down, distracted, expecting another supplier delay or a late payment notification. Instead, I saw the message. You don't need to come in anymore. That was it. No explanation, no context, no punctuation strong enough to explain what had just been done to me. At first, my brain refused to process it. I actually laughed, just once, under my breath. A small, confused sound. I thought maybe it was meant for someone else. Or maybe it was a joke, or maybe I was just tired and reading it wrong. I reread it, slowly. You don't need to come in anymore. My chest tightened, like someone had pulled a cord inside me and forgotten to let go. I felt dizzy, not spinning, just hollow. As if gravity had suddenly increased and my body hadn't adjusted yet. I typed back. What do you mean? The message stayed unread. That's when I noticed how quiet the parking lot was. No footsteps. No voices. Just the faint hum of traffic somewhere far away. The building in front of me, the one I'd unlocked every morning for years, looked unfamiliar. Like it belonged to someone else. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't from the company line. It was from my mother. We'll talk later. This was a family decision. A family. That word hit harder than the first message. My fingers started shaking. Not violently, just enough to betray me. I leaned against the car because my knees felt unreliable, like they might fold without warning. I called her. Straight to voicemail. I called again. And again. Nothing. I remember staring at the glass doors of the office, wondering if my key still worked, wondering if I was allowed inside the place I had built with my own hands, wondering how you could be locked out of your own life without even being told it was happening. I didn't go in. Something told me not to. Something quiet and instinctive, like touching a hot stove and knowing better before the burn fully sets in. I sat in the car instead. That's when it hit me. Not all at once, but in waves. The early mornings. The nights sleeping on the office couch. The weekends I canceled. The relationships I neglected. Every sacrifice lined up in my mind, waiting for an explanation that never came. And then the realization slid in, slow and merciless. This wasn't a mistake, this was deliberate. I opened my email, there was legal language. Clean. Polite. Final. Ownership had been transferred. Control reassigned. Authority revoked. My name removed. The business was no longer mine. The business I built from nothing. The business valued at $5.2 million. The business my mother had just given to my sister. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. My breathing felt shallow, like my lungs were only doing half their job. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. Not to cry, because I couldn't, but to stay present. To keep myself from floating away from the moment entirely. I kept thinking, there has to be a reason. A conversation I missed. A detail I don't know yet. But deep down, something else was forming. A colder thought. A quieter one. They didn't forget me. They chose without me. My phone buzzed again. A message from my sister this time. I didn't know how to tell you. That sentence cracked something open inside my chest. Didn't know how to tell me. That my life's work had been handed over. That my role was finished. That I was no longer needed. I typed and deleted a dozen replies. Questions. Accusations. Please. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt small enough for the damage that had just been done. So I said nothing. And in that silence, I felt something I'd never felt before. Not anger, not sadness, but displacement. Like I'd been removed from my own story mid-sentence. I thought of all the times my mother had called me late at night, worried about cash flow. All the times she'd told people, "My child built this." All the pride in her voice when the business hit milestones. Had any of it been real? Or had I always been temporary? The sun was setting by the time I finally started the car. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay there. Every red light felt longer than usual. Every reflection in the rearview mirror looked unfamiliar, like I was watching someone else drive away from their life. I didn't cry that night. I didn't sleep either. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying that single message over and over again. "You don't need to come in anymore." As if I were an intern. As if I were replaceable. As if the years meant nothing. That was the moment everything changed. Not because the business was taken, but because I finally understood something I'd been avoiding for a long time. Love, when mixed with power, reveals its true shape. And in that parking lot, keys in my hand, future erased with a text, I learned exactly where I stood. Outside. And they hadn't even looked back. When people hear that I built a business, they imagine a clean story, a confident beginning, a straight line from idea to success. They don't see the years before there was anything worth taking. They don't see the version of me that existed long before the money, before the valuation, before anyone cared enough to notice. The truth is, it didn't start with ambition. It started with desperation. I remember sitting at a kitchen table that wasn't really mine, staring at a laptop that barely worked, calculating how long I could stretch what little savings I had left. Every number felt like a threat. Rent, food, internet, all non-negotiable. Failure wasn't dramatic back then, it was quiet. It looked like eviction notices and unanswered emails. I didn't tell anyone how bad it was. Not my friends, not my family, especially not my mother. I'd already learned that silence was safer than worry, so I carried it alone. The first version of the business was embarrassing. I wouldn't even call it a company. It was me doing everything: sales, support, operations, accounting, often badly, always exhausted. I answered emails with shaking hands, terrified that one wrong word would cost me the only client keeping me afloat. Some nights I didn't sleep at all. I'd lie there listening to the hum of my laptop fan, wondering if I was delusional for believing this could work, wondering if I was wasting time I couldn't afford to lose. But every morning, I got up and did it again. Not because I was confident, because quitting felt worse. I took calls in stairwells, in parking lots, in borrowed offices. I learned by failing in real time. I made mistakes that cost money I didn't have. I apologized more than I should have. I absorbed blame when things went wrong because I didn't have the luxury of ego. There were moments I almost asked for help. Almost. But I knew how that conversation would go. Advice without understanding. Doubt disguised as concern. So I stayed quiet and kept building. When the first real contract came in, I didn't celebrate. I just exhaled, like I'd been underwater longer than I realized. I remember thinking, okay, one more month. That's how survival works. You don't dream years ahead. You focus on staying alive long enough to reach the next checkpoint. As the business grew, so did the demands. More clients, more responsibility, more pressure to be flawless. I reinvested everything. New systems, better tools. Hires. I trained myself because there was no one else. I became the backbone without noticing it happening. People started to say things like, "You're always working," as if it were a personality flaw instead of a requirement. They didn't see that if I stopped, everything would collapse. There was no safety net, no cushion, just me holding it together. My mother watched all of this from a distance. She saw the growth, not the cost. She saw the outcomes, not the nights I stared at spreadsheets until my eyes burned. She told people she was proud. She told me I was doing great. But pride is easy when you don't have to carry the weight. I never asked for recognition. I didn't need applause. I just needed trust. I believed, naively, that the work itself would protect me. That effort created ownership in a way no document ever could. I thought building something from nothing meant something to the people who shared my name. There were moments when things almost broke me. A major client threatening to leave. A system failure that wiped weeks of progress. A payroll week where the numbers barely lined up. I absorbed the stress quietly, smiling in conversations, pretending everything was fine. Because that's what you do when people depend on you. And slowly, without realizing it, the business became valuable. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily. Consistently. The kind of growth that only comes from patience and obsession. When someone finally put a number on it, when I heard the valuation out loud, it didn't feel real. 5.2 million. I remember nodding, as if I understood what that meant, while inside I was thinking about the version of me who couldn't afford groceries. I didn't feel rich. I felt tired. But I also felt secure for the first time in my life. Like maybe all the sacrifice had led somewhere solid. Somewhere untouchable. I started to believe that this was it. That I'd finally built something no one could take away from me. Not because of contracts or titles, but because of history. Because of everything I'd put into it. I trusted the wrong thing. I trusted that contribution equaled protection. That loyalty went both ways. That blood made betrayal impossible. I didn't realize that while I was building the business, someone else was watching it. Not as a life's work, but as an asset. Something transferable. Something useful. I was too busy surviving to notice. Looking back, I see it now. How my silence made me invisible. How my reliability made me expendable. How never asking for credit taught people they didn't have to give it. But at the time, I believed in the purity of effort. I believed that if you gave everything, you'd be safe. That belief cost me more than money. It cost me the illusion that hard work alone is enough. Because when the business was finally strong, when it no longer needed constant saving, someone decided it didn't need me either. And all those years of sacrifice, they didn't disappear. They just stopped belonging to me. I didn't find out the way you'd expect. There was no family meeting, no tense conversation where everyone finally told the truth. It happened the way favoritism usually does, quietly, efficiently, and without apology. At first, it showed up as distance. Conversations shortened. Updates stopped. Decisions were suddenly made before I knew they existed. I told myself I was imagining it. I'd always been the responsible one, the reliable one. If something felt off, I assumed it was stress, or exhaustion, or my fault. My sister started appearing more. Not in the way builders appear, rolling up their sleeves, asking questions, staying late, but in the way guests do. She'd sit in meetings, nodding, scrolling on her phone, occasionally throwing out ideas that sounded good but went nowhere. And everyone listened. That was the first crack. I remember one afternoon in particular. We were reviewing numbers, real numbers, the kind that decide whether a business survives or bleeds. I was explaining a strategy I'd spent weeks refining when my sister interrupted me. Not with a solution. Just a feeling. "I don't know," she said. "That sounds like a lot." The room went quiet. Then my mother nodded. "Well, she has a point." Just like that. Weeks of work reduced to a shrug. I swallowed it. I always did. I told myself it wasn't worth pushing back. That family harmony mattered more than ego. That I didn't need validation to know the truth. What I didn't realize was that every time I stayed silent, I was teaching them how to treat me. My sister began positioning herself as the heart of the business. The vision. The one who understood people. Meanwhile, I was framed as the technical one. The worker. The one who handled the boring parts. No one said it out loud. They didn't have to. I watched as responsibilities shifted, not because I'd failed, but because someone else wanted to feel important. Titles were discussed without me. Future plans mentioned in passing, like I was a consultant instead of the founder. When I tried to raise concerns, they were softened into criticism. You're being negative. You're too attached. You need to trust us. A trust. That word again. I trusted my mother. That was my mistake. She spoke about fairness like it was abstract, like something flexible. She said things like, "We all have different roles, and your sister needs confidence, and you've always been strong." Strong. That word was used against me more than I realized. Strength became the justification. Because I could handle it. Because I didn't need reassurance. Because I'd survive. My sister didn't have to prove anything. She was protected by sympathy. I was burdened by competence. There was one conversation I still replay in my head. We were alone, just the two of us. I asked my mother directly where I stood. I needed clarity. I needed to know if my role was changing. She smiled, the kind of smile that avoids answers. "You'll always be part of this?" she said. "But it's time we let your sister step into something meaningful." I remember nodding. I remember agreeing. I remember telling myself that generosity would be rewarded. It wasn't. From that point on, decisions bypassed me entirely. My authority was slowly drained, like a battery losing charge. I wasn't removed all at once. That would have been too obvious, too confrontational. Instead, I was sidelined. And my sister, she was elevated. Mistakes she made were excused. Problems she caused were reframed as learning experiences. When I made the same mistakes years earlier, they were proof I wasn't ready. I started to feel like a stranger in my own creation. Like I was watching someone else wear my life and claim it fit better. The favoritism became undeniable when loyalty was tested. A client raised concerns, a serious issue. I presented facts. My sister presented feelings. Guess which one mattered more? After the meeting, my mother pulled me aside and told me I needed to be more supportive. Supportive. Of what? Of being erased. I didn't argue. I went home and stared at the ceiling, wondering when love became conditional. Wondering how long this had been planned. Wondering if I'd ever really been seen. The truth hit me slowly, like a bruise forming under the skin. This wasn't about fairness. It wasn't about growth. It wasn't even about business. It was about comfort. My sister made my mother feel needed. I made her feel challenged. And when given a choice, she chose comfort. By the time the blindside came, it almost made sense. Almost. The groundwork had been laid. The narrative prepared. The roles assigned. I was the worker who could start again. My sister was the one who deserved stability. No one asked if I agreed. No one asked what it cost me. They didn't think they needed to. Because in their minds, I'd already given everything away. One silent compromise at a time. And when the final decision was made, it wasn't framed as betrayal. It was framed as destiny. As if this outcome had always been inevitable. As if I were foolish to be surprised. But I was surprised. Not because they chose her. Because they thought I wouldn't notice. I left without ceremony. No dramatic exit. No final speech where I said everything I'd been holding back. I didn't slam doors or send long messages explaining my side. I just disappeared. One day I was there, the next day I wasn't. At first it felt unreal. Like I was playing a role in someone else's life, and the scene had ended without warning. I kept reaching for my phone out of habit, checking notifications that no longer mattered. My calendar was suddenly empty, and that silence was terrifying. When your entire identity is wrapped around building something, walking away doesn't feel brave. It feels like erasure. The first week was the hardest. I woke up early out of muscle memory, heart already racing, mind already solving problems that weren't mine anymore. Then I'd remember. And the weight would crash down again. I didn't know who I was without the business. Without the responsibility. Without the constant pressure that had shaped my days for years. I stayed home more than I should have. Let the world shrink. I told people I was taking time off because explaining the truth required energy I didn't have. Every conversation felt like an interrogation I wasn't ready to face. How's the business? What's next for you? Are you okay? I learned quickly that people don't actually want honest answers. They want reassurance that everything makes sense, that success follows rules, that betrayal doesn't happen quietly. So I lied. I said I was fine. Inside, I was unraveling. Money started to feel real in a way it hadn't in years. Not desperate, but uncertain. I watched expenses more closely. I canceled things. I simplified my life until it barely resembled the one I'd built. There's a strange shame that comes with starting over when you shouldn't have to. When you've already proven yourself. When you know the loss wasn't because of failure, but because of trust misplaced. I felt isolated in a way I'd never experienced before. Not alone, isolated. There's a difference. Alone is physical. Isolation is emotional. It's realizing that the people you thought were your foundation were never really holding you. My family stopped calling. Not out of anger. Out of avoidance. Silence became their way of moving on without accountability. That hurt more than the takeover. Some nights I sat in the dark and replayed everything. The moments I should have spoken up. The red flags I'd ignored. The times I'd chosen peace over truth. I wondered if I'd been weak or just hopeful. I didn't have answers, just questions that kept me awake. But survival has a way of focusing you. After a while, the shock dulled. The pain stopped screaming and started whispering. That's when something shifted. I realized no one was coming to fix this. No apology would restore what was lost. No explanation would make it fair. If I wanted a future, I had to build it again. This time without illusion. I started small, quiet, consulting projects at first. Nothing flashy, just enough to keep momentum alive. I worked alone intentionally, no partners. No shared control. Every decision passed through me. It felt strange at first, being solely responsible again. But also clean. There was no politics, no performance. Just work and results. I remembered who I was before the business had a name. Before success complicated everything, I was resourceful, adaptable, relentless. Those traits hadn't been taken from me. They'd just been buried. As the weeks passed, my confidence returned, not as arrogance, but as certainty. I'd done this before under worse conditions. I knew how to survive discomfort. I knew how to create value from nothing. And this time, I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. That was the difference. I reconnected with people I'd neglected. Not to complain. Not to seek validation. Just to exist outside the shadow of what I'd lost. I started sleeping better. Eating better. Thinking clearer. For the first time in years, my thoughts weren't constantly hijacked by emergencies. I had space. And in that space, clarity grew. I saw my family's situation for what it was. Not a misunderstanding, but a pattern. I'd been useful, not valued. Trusted with labor, not authority. Loved conditionally. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. Because once you stop trying to earn love from people who benefit from your sacrifice, you stop bleeding for them. I stopped checking on the old business. I didn't ask how it was doing. I didn't need updates. Detachment was survival. There were days I felt angry. Days I felt numb. Days I felt strangely grateful. Healing isn't linear. It loops and backtracks and surprises you. But slowly, steadily, I stopped feeling like a victim of circumstances and started feeling like an author again. Not of a comeback story. Of a boundary. Walking away taught me something no success ever had. You can lose everything that defines you and still remain intact. And in that quiet rebuilding phase, alone, underestimated by the very people who once depended on me, I found something I hadn't had before: self-trust. And that changed everything. I didn't hear about the collapse right away. That's the thing about distance. It protects you from information you're not ready to process. For a while, the old business existed only as a shadow in my mind, something that had already passed, even though it was still operating without me. Then the hints started slipping through. A former employee texted me late one night. Nothing dramatic. Just a question that felt too heavy for its size. "Are you still involved over there?" I stared at the screen longer than I should have. "No," I replied. "Why?" The typing bubble disappeared, appeared again. "Things are different." That was the first crack. After that, the silence broke in small, almost accidental ways. A supplier asking who to contact now. A client I'd worked with for years casually mentioning delays. A LinkedIn post from someone I recognized announcing they were moving on to new opportunities. At first, I told myself not to care. I had no right to, no reason to. I'd chosen distance for a reason. But curiosity is human, and closure is seductive. So I listened, quietly. What I learned didn't shock me. It confirmed something I already knew, but hadn't wanted to say out loud. Without me, the business didn't collapse immediately. It stumbled. It hesitated. It made confident decisions without understanding the consequences. Systems I'd designed to be handled carefully were treated like shortcuts. Relationships I'd spent years nurturing were assumed to be permanent. Clients who stayed because of trust were managed like numbers. The structure was still there. The discipline was not. My sister tried to fill the space I'd left with presence. Meetings, announcements, vision statements. But presence isn't the same as leadership, and enthusiasm can't replace experience. Mistakes piled up quietly at first. Missed deadlines, poor hires, decisions made for optics instead of outcomes. Every problem had an excuse. Every warning sign was reframed as growing pains. My mother defended her, constantly. "She's learning. She just needs time." This is how you grow. Time is expensive when you don't know what you're doing. I heard about an incident with a major client. One I'd personally managed for years. There had been a dispute, a misunderstanding that could have been resolved with one careful conversation. Instead, it escalated. They walked. That single loss triggered a chain reaction. Revenue dipped, pressure increased, panic set in, and panic makes people careless. The business started bleeding in places no one noticed until it was too late. Employees felt it first. Morale dropped. Confusion spread. People didn't know who to listen to. Decisions contradicted each other. Authority shifted depending on who spoke last. A company can survive bad quarters. It can't survive uncertainty. I watched from a distance, not with satisfaction but with a strange detachment. This wasn't revenge. It was inevitability. You remove the foundation and expect the house to stand because it still looks intact from the outside. It doesn't work that way. Then came the calls. Not to me at first, to people around me. Mutual contacts, old partners, quiet inquiries that circled closer and closer. "Have you talked to them? Do you know if they're okay? Would you ever consider stepping back in?" The shift in tone was unmistakable. They weren't confident anymore. They were worried. The valuation that once felt untouchable started shrinking. Numbers don't lie, but they also don't care about pride. The market responded quickly. Opportunities dried up. Reputation took hits no press release could fix. And still, no one apologized. Not yet. I heard my sister had started working longer hours, that she was overwhelmed, that she didn't sleep much. I heard my mother was stressed, aging faster than before, carrying the weight she'd handed over so casually. For a brief moment, I felt something close to sympathy. Then I remembered the parking lot, the message, the silence. Empathy doesn't require self-erasure. The truth is, they expected me to fail quietly, to struggle, to realize I needed them, to come back humbled. Instead, I was fine. Not publicly successful, not flashy, but stable, clear, untouchable in a way I'd never been before. And that's what scared them. Because if I was okay without them, then maybe they'd made the wrong choice. That's when the narrative started to shift. I was no longer the difficult one. I was misunderstood. The separation was unfortunate. The decision had been complicated. Complicated is what people say when they don't want to admit they were wrong. The exposure didn't come from me. I didn't tell my story. I didn't post. I didn't correct anyone. Time did it for me. Every missed target, every lost client, every departure, the truth surfaced in the only language that mattered: results. By the time they fully understood what they'd lost, the damage was done. The business still existed, but the illusion was gone. And for the first time since everything had been taken from me, I felt something unexpected: relief. Because their collapse didn't define me, it revealed them. The first call came late at night. That alone told me everything. People don't call late unless they're desperate or afraid, and this call carried both. I stared at the screen while it rang. My mother's name glowing in the dark like a ghost from a life I'd already buried. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it stopped, my heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. Not because I missed her voice, but because I knew what it meant. Something had finally broken. Something they could no longer pretend was manageable. The voicemail came seconds later. Her voice was different, softer, careful. Like she was stepping on thin ice and knew it. She said my name the way she used to when I was a child, and she needed something from me. She said she hoped I was doing well. She said they should talk. She didn't say sorry. Not yet. I didn't call back. The next day, my sister texted. A long message. Too long. The kind of message people send when they're trying to control a conversation before it starts. She said things had been overwhelming. That she hadn't realized how much I handled. That she felt lost. Lost. I almost laughed. I imagined her sitting in the office I used to unlock every morning, staring at problems I'd quietly absorbed for years, realizing too late that confidence without competence is just noise. Still, I said nothing. Silence had become my boundary. A week passed. Then another. The calls increased, not just from them, but from people orbiting the situation, relatives, old contacts, voices from the past suddenly concerned about healing and family unity. That's when I knew the business was in real trouble. People only talk about unity when they need someone to carry the weight again. Finally, I agreed to meet. Not because I owed them anything, but because I wanted to look them in the eye. I wanted to see if they understood what they'd done, or if they were just afraid of losing more. We met in a quiet place. Neutral. No home court advantage. My mother looked smaller, somehow older. The confidence she once carried so effortlessly had been replaced with tension she couldn't hide. My sister wouldn't meet my eyes. They talked first. They always did. They spoke about stress, pressure, how fast things had unraveled, how hard it was to replace someone who knew everything. They told me the business wasn't the same. That employees missed me. That clients asked for me by name. Each sentence felt like a confession disguised as a compliment. Then came the ask. Not directly. Not at first. They said they wanted my input, my guidance, my help. They said family makes mistakes. That forgiveness is strength. That what matters is moving forward. Still no apology. I listened, calm, detached. The version of me they were talking to no longer needed their approval. When they finally stopped, When the silence stretched long enough to make them uncomfortable, I spoke. I told them I remembered the parking lot. The message. The way decisions had been made without me. I told them I remembered being told I was strong enough to start over, and I told them they were right. I was. That's when my mother cried. Not quietly, not gracefully, the kind of crying that demands attention. She said she hadn't realized what she was doing, that she thought she was helping, that she never meant to hurt me. I believed she believed that, but intention doesn't erase impact. My sister finally looked up. Her voice cracked when she said she couldn't do it without me, that the responsibility was crushing her, that she was scared. And in that moment, I felt the power shift completely. They weren't offering me my place back. They were asking me to save them. I took a breath. Not because I was emotional, but because I was choosing my words carefully. I told them no. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted them to fail. But because returning would mean agreeing that what they did was survivable without consequence. And it wasn't. I told them I'd built something once without help, without support, without protection. And I could do it again, but I wouldn't do it for people who only valued me when they were drowning. I told my sister she deserved to learn what leadership costs. I told my mother that love doesn't excuse control. They begged then, truly begged. Promises, titles, ownership percentages, apologies that came too late to feel sincere. But I was already gone. Walking away that second time felt different, lighter, final. The business didn't survive much longer after that. It limped along. Downsized. Lost relevance. The story ended quietly, the way it began. As for me, I kept building. Not loudly. Not for validation. But with boundaries strong enough to protect what I create. They took the business I built once. They never got the chance to take me again.